When Trump mocked Obama's Harvard law degree as overrated, no one expected the former president to answer live on air with a calm, cutting response that left legal experts speechless. It happened in the kind of room where every word is magnified. The White House press briefing was already tense that afternoon. Cameras clicked, reporters shifted in their seats, and President Trump stood at the podium, leaning forward with that familiar air of impatience. Then, almost out of nowhere, he dropped a line that would dominate headlines within the hour. "You know," Trump said, his voice carrying a mix of sarcasm and bravado, "they say Barack Obama went to Harvard Law. They say he was a big-shot editor of the Law Review. Honestly, overrated. I've seen better lawyers from community college." The room rippled with murmurs. Some reporters glanced at each other, eyebrows raised. Others immediately started typing furiously, knowing this was the soundbite that would lead the evening news. It wasn't the first time Trump had attacked Obama, but this was different. It wasn't about policy or politics. It was personal. He wasn't just questioning Obama's decisions as a former president. He was questioning his very credibility, the foundation of his professional life. A reporter from the Associated Press raised her hand, her voice cutting through the noise. "Mr. President, are you suggesting Barack Obama's law degree isn't legitimate?" Trump smirked, pausing long enough to let the cameras zoom in. "I'm saying Harvard hands out fancy titles, but it doesn't make you smart. Look where it got us. 8 years of a disaster. If that's what a Harvard degree gets you, maybe it's not worth very much." The room erupted, half with shouted questions, half with stunned silence. A correspondent from CNN shouted over the noise, "Do you have any proof of what you're saying?" Trump waved it off with a dismissive flick of his hand. "Proof? Everybody knows. People are talking about it. A lot of people, actually, you'll see. Very overrated guy. Very overrated degree." Behind the cameras, aides exchanged nervous glances. They knew this would spiral fast. Once you attack someone's education, especially when that someone is a former president with a legal career rooted in one of the most respected universities in the world, you're not just throwing shade. You're questioning the value of one of America's most prestigious institutions. One reporter from the Washington Post pressed harder. "Mr. President, are you aware that Barack Obama graduated magna cum laude from Harvard Law and was the first black president of the Harvard Law Review?" Trump shrugged, almost reveling in the attention. "Yeah, I heard the stories. Doesn't impress me. Titles don't make you a leader. Results do. And I've delivered results like no one else. You look at him, you look at me. Who's winning? It's not even close." The cameras zoomed in closer, trying to catch every flicker of expression. For the journalists in the room, it was a strange mixture of disbelief and recognition. This was Trump at his most unfiltered. A direct, personal strike on something widely seen as untouchable. He wasn't just targeting Obama. He was targeting the very idea of academic merit, of expertise itself. Within seconds of the press conference ending, clips began circulating online. Twitter lit up with outrage, disbelief, and mockery. Some of Trump's supporters applauded the comment, saying it was about time someone told the truth about elites. But many more were horrified. For them, it wasn't just about Obama. It was about every student grinding through late nights of study, every immigrant family proud of a child who had worked their way into an Ivy League classroom, every lawyer who knew what it took to rise in such a competitive environment. In Boston, a law professor at Harvard sat in her office watching the clip replay on CNN. She sighed, shaking her head. "This isn't about Obama," she said quietly to a colleague standing in the doorway. "This is about dismantling trust in institutions." The press conference was supposed to be about trade negotiations with Europe, but that subject was already forgotten. The headline was set, "Trump insults Obama's law degree." Back at the White House, aides scrambled to manage the fallout. Some tried to pivot the conversation back to policy. Others knew there was no chance. Trump had thrown the match, and the fire was already spreading. And somewhere in Washington, Barack Obama himself was being briefed about the comments. He listened quietly, chin resting on his hand, as his former communications director read the transcript aloud. He didn't interrupt, didn't roll his eyes, didn't let out the sigh that the room expected. Instead, when the words were finished, he leaned back in his chair and said calmly, "So, he went after Harvard Law?" A pause, then a faint smile. "All right." The aides in the room exchanged glances. They had seen this expression before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even annoyance. It was the look of a man already planning his next move. But what came next wasn't just another statement. It would become one of the most dissected responses of Obama's post-presidency. By the time Air Force One touched down in Indianapolis later that evening, the press conference clip had already looped across every major network. CNN cut its broadcast into split screens, one showing Trump at the podium, another replaying Obama's old footage from Harvard, robed and smiling beside fellow graduates. Fox News ran panels with commentators debating whether Trump's remarks were political theater or a justified critique of elitism. MSNBC brought on a constitutional law professor from Stanford who flatly said, "This is absurd. No one questions Barack Obama's credentials. This is about political insecurity, not education." On Twitter, hashtags shot up in minutes. Obama Harvard, Trump, insult, law degree gate. Tens of thousands of tweets poured in, mixing fury, jokes, and disbelief. A young law student in Los Angeles posted, "Spent 3 years drowning in casebooks and sleepless nights just to have the president dismiss it all in one sentence. Respect to Obama for showing us the grind means something." Her tweet racked up 50,000 likes in less than an hour. Meanwhile, anchors in Washington tried to keep up with the reaction. NBC's Lester Holt asked his panel, "What do we make of a sitting president dismissing a law degree that represents years of academic excellence? What does that say to every student in America working their way through debt and endless exams?" One analyst, a seasoned political journalist from Philadelphia named Robert Kinsey, leaned forward in his chair. "This is bigger than Obama. Trump is chipping away at the very idea that expertise matters. If you can make a Harvard law degree sound meaningless, then what stops you from saying the same about doctors, scientists, or judges?" The studio grew quiet for a beat. Then another voice cut in, Kelly Marston, a conservative-leaning commentator. "But let's be fair. Trump's base doesn't see this as an insult. They see it as him calling out elitism. To them, Obama is the face of a system that never gave them a chance. They're not thinking about Harvard as an institution. They're thinking about being left behind." The back and forth captured the tension perfectly. It wasn't just about Obama anymore. It was about who gets to define success in America and who gets to tear it down. At the New York Times newsroom, editors scrambled to choose the right headline for the front page. Options floated around the table. Trump questions, Obama's Harvard credentials, president attacks Obama's education, Harvard law degree, overrated, Trump says. Eventually, they went with Trump dismisses Obama's legal education, sparks national debate. Across the country in Dallas, a group of lawyers gathered at a bar after work, eyes fixed on the TV above the counter. One of them, a young attorney named Jasmine Lee, shook her head. "I remember applying to Harvard. I didn't get in, but the process was brutal. To hear the president say it means nothing, that's insulting to everyone who even tried." Her colleague, sipping a beer, added, "Obama doesn't even have to defend himself. His record speaks louder than any insult." But they all knew he would respond. Obama never let a national conversation slip past him without adding perspective. Meanwhile, in Cambridge, current Harvard law students sat huddled in dorm lounges, talking about the attack. One student laughed bitterly. "If Obama's degree is worthless, what does that make ours?" Another replied, "It makes it more important than ever to prove why it matters." They agreed on one thing. Obama had to answer, and when he did, they wanted him to do it live. Cable news kept looping the same clip of Trump shrugging at the podium, his words layered with commentary. "Titles don't make you a leader, results do." That line struck a nerve. Late-night shows piled on. Stephen Colbert quipped, "Trump says Obama's law degree is overrated. I guess he thinks the best way to practice law is to declare bankruptcy 6 times and hope it works in court." The audience roared, but beneath the laughter was a deeper question. How would Obama answer? Journalists camped outside his D.C. office, waiting for a statement. Staffers offered nothing but silence. Then, just as speculation reached its peak, NBC News broke the story. Obama would appear live in a primetime interview that same evening. The announcement hit like an electric charge. Cable hosts leaned in, eager for ratings. Social media exploded again, this time with anticipation. "Obama going live tonight. This is going to be one for the books," one tweet read, garnering tens of thousands of retweets. Back at the networks, producers shifted gears. The interview wasn't just a response. It was a showdown. Anchors prepared their questions, legal experts polished their talking points, and Americans across the country set reminders on their phones. But behind the scenes, Obama wasn't rushing to craft a fiery rebuttal. He was calmly deciding how to turn an insult into a lesson. When the clip finally reached Barack Obama, he was sitting in his Washington office, a quiet space lined with books, family photos, and the kind of calm that comes from having weathered years of political storms. An aide walked in carrying a tablet, her expression somewhere between frustration and disbelief. "Mr. President," she said carefully, "you'll want to see this." Obama set down the pen he'd been using to sign copies of his memoir for a stack of donors. He leaned back in his chair as the aide pressed play. Trump's voice filled the room. "They say Barack Obama went to Harvard Law. Honestly, overrated. I've seen better lawyers from community college." The staffers gathered in the room held their breath, waiting for some visible reaction. But Obama didn't flinch. He listened, elbows resting on the armrests, fingertips pressed together under his chin. When the clip ended, the aide tilted her head. "Well," she said cautiously, "that's out there." Obama let out a low chuckle. "Out there's one way to put it." He paused, then asked, "What's the chatter like?" Another staffer, a younger man scrolling through his phone, answered immediately. "It's everywhere. Twitter's on fire. Headlines already running on CNN, NBC, Times, you name it. Hashtags trending, people calling it an attack on education itself. Harvard law students are furious. Fox is spinning it as him calling out elitism, but most of the coverage..." He trailed off, showing Obama the screen. "It's not good for Trump." Obama studied the phone, his eyes narrowing slightly. Then he leaned back in his chair again. "He went after the law degree," he murmured. "Not policy, not leadership. The degree." He tapped the armrest twice with his index finger, lost in thought. That's when Valerie Rhodes, one of his longtime advisors, stepped forward. "So what do you want to do? Issue a statement? Let it roll off?" Obama shook his head. "If I release a statement, it'll just look like I'm playing defense. That's his game. He wants the back and forth. But if I sit down and speak to the American people, calmly, clearly, on the record, then it's not just a rebuttal. It's a lesson." The room went quiet. They'd heard this tone before. It was the same tone he used before his 2008 speech on race in Philadelphia, the one that had silenced critics and elevated him from candidate to statesman. Another aide asked, "So you want to go live?" Obama nodded slowly. "Yes, tonight. No delay. We set the tone before this spirals. People are watching. They need to see that insults don't dictate the conversation." Valerie arched an eyebrow. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," Obama replied. "Trump wants noise. We'll give them clarity." Across town, word traveled quickly to NBC headquarters that Obama was considering a live interview. Producers scrambled, securing a primetime slot and rearranging the entire evening schedule. Anchors prepped, analysts were called in, and the anticipation grew hour by hour. Meanwhile, Michelle Obama, who had been briefed earlier, called her husband. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge of frustration. "He attacked Harvard, Barack. He attacked what you worked for, what thousands of kids dream of. You can't let that slide." "I'm not letting it slide," Obama assured her. "But I won't swing wild. That's not who I am. I'll answer him with substance. That's how you teach people where truth really lies." She was quiet for a moment. Then softer, she said, "Make it about more than you. Make it about everyone, whoever worked their way up through books, long nights, and doubt. That's bigger than one insult." Obama smiled faintly. "That's exactly what I was thinking." Back in the office, aides worked quickly to prepare talking points, though Obama waved most of them off. "I know what I need to say," he told them. "Keep it simple. Respect institutions, respect truth, and remind people that leadership is proven by action, not by tearing others down." By late afternoon, the news was official. Obama would sit down for a live primetime interview at 8 p.m. Eastern. The announcement spread like wildfire. Twitter feeds exploded again. Newsrooms adjusted their rundowns. On cable, anchors teased the coming interview like it was a heavyweight fight. In Boston, a group of law professors gathered in a conference room at Harvard. One of them, Professor Alan Kim, looked around the table. "I've taught constitutional law for 20 years, he said quietly, "but I guarantee Obama's about to give the country the most memorable lecture they'll ever hear." But before the cameras rolled, America needed to see how Obama would prepare himself for a moment that wasn't just about defending a degree. It was about defending the very idea of truth. By 6 o'clock Eastern Time, the news cycle had shifted entirely around one event: Barack Obama's decision to appear live. Cable networks cleared schedules, producers called in extra crews, and editors in every newsroom in Washington knew this wasn't just another segment. It was a cultural moment. Inside NBC's Washington bureau, producers worked feverishly to polish the stage. A mahogany desk, a backdrop of the Capitol glowing in the night sky, and careful lighting to highlight Obama's trademark calm demeanor. Every detail mattered. "We want gravitas," one producer barked. "No theatrics, no gimmicks. This is history. Treat it that way." At the same time, in Obama's office, his closest aides gathered for what felt like a war room strategy session. But unlike political campaigns of the past, there was no frantic shouting, no flurry of opposition research. Obama sat at the head of the table, relaxed, a cup of tea steaming in front of him. He listened as his advisors outlined possible approaches, highlight his academic record, call out Trump's insecurities, pivot to the importance of education. Finally, he raised his hand. "We're overcomplicating it. People don't need a resume recap. They don't want me to spar. They want reassurance that facts still matter, that work still matters, that institutions mean something in this country. If I get drawn into the weeds of my degree, I've already lost." Valerie Rhodes, leaning forward with her glasses perched low on her nose, nodded slowly. "So you'll frame it bigger than yourself?" Obama gave a small smile. "Exactly. If this is just about me, then Trump wins. If it's about every student, every parent, every immigrant who believes hard work leads somewhere, then it's not a counterpunch. It's a reminder of who we are." Across the room, an aide scribbled notes, though Obama waved him off again. "Don't write me a speech. I'll speak off the cuff. That's how people know it's real." The team exchanged glances. It was risky. Unscripted live interviews always carried the possibility of a stumble, but they also knew this was when Obama thrived, when the stakes were high, and he had to distill a complicated idea into something every American could feel in their gut. Meanwhile, back at the White House, Trump was briefed on Obama's impending interview. He grinned when his press secretary told him, "Good, let him talk. Nobody watches him anymore. I'm the show." But behind the bravado, aides whispered about whether this might backfire. One senior advisor muttered under his breath, "If Obama does what I think he's going to do, we're in trouble." As 7 o'clock approached, America buzzed with anticipation. In San Diego, a group of law students crammed into a small apartment living room, pizza boxes stacked on the coffee table, eyes glued to the TV. In Cleveland, a retired judge invited neighbors over, telling them, "Trust me, this is going to be worth watching." Across Middle America, in small towns and big cities alike, households tuned in. It wasn't just Obama versus Trump. It was a test of what kind of voice Americans wanted to hear in moments of confrontation. Back in the NBC bureau, the anchor tapped her earpiece. "We're on in 5 minutes. Obama's on site. Cameras rolling." The director counted down. "We go live in 3, 2... At that exact moment, Obama was in the green room, adjusting his tie with calm precision. A makeup artist dusted his forehead lightly, but he waved her away after a second. "That's enough," he said gently. His voice carried the steadiness of someone who knew exactly what he wanted to say. Valerie poked her head in. "Ready?" Obama stood, rolling his shoulders back. "Always." He walked down the narrow hallway toward the studio, each step slow but certain. The weight of the moment pressed around him, not as anxiety, but as clarity. As he reached the entrance, he turned briefly to his aide. "Remember this. It's not about me. It's about us." The stage lights flared as he entered the studio, greeted by polite applause from a handful of staff and technicians. He shook hands with the anchor, exchanged a brief smile, and settled into the chair. Millions of Americans sat on couches, bar stools, and dorm room floors, waiting for the words that could turn a petty insult into something unforgettable. The red light on the camera blinked on, but what came out of Obama's mouth in the first 60 seconds would silence even his critics and set the tone for a response that felt less like a defense and more like a national civics lesson. The moment the red light on the camera blinked, the nation collectively leaned closer. Living rooms, bars, dorm lounges, and office break rooms became extensions of the studio. The anchor, seated across from Obama, began with the kind of introduction designed to carry weight. Former President Barack Obama is with us tonight in an exclusive live interview. Earlier today, President Trump questioned Mr. Obama's Harvard Law degree, calling it overrated. Tonight, we give him the opportunity to respond. The anchor's voice faded and the camera cut to Obama. He looked steady, composed, his posture upright yet relaxed. No clenched jaw, no tension in his eyes, just the familiar calm that had defined his presidency. "Good evening," Obama began, voice low and even. "Look, I don't usually comment on every remark that comes out of the White House these days. Folks say things, sometimes to make headlines, sometimes to stir division. But when those remarks touch on something bigger than me, on something that represents millions of Americans, I feel an obligation to respond." He paused, letting the silence breathe. The anchor didn't interrupt. The weight of his tone did all the work. "When I was a student at Harvard Law," he continued, "I didn't think about how the degree would look on a wall. I thought about how many nights I could push through, how many times I could question myself and keep going. I thought about my mom raising me, about scholarships, about loans I'd be paying off for years. I thought about every kid who believed that if they worked hard, they could make it too." The camera caught the faintest nods from the anchor, but she stayed silent, giving Obama room. "Now," he said, leaning slightly forward, "you can disagree with my policies. That's democracy. You can criticize my presidency. That's fair. But when we start dismissing education, when we start telling kids that the hours, the sacrifice, the grit don't mean anything, that's when we lose something bigger than a debate. We lose faith in the promise of America." In a newsroom across town, producers signaled each other, "This is the clip." They knew the first 60 seconds would travel faster than wildfire. The anchor finally interjected, "Mr. President, to be clear, are you saying this isn't about defending yourself?" Obama gave the faintest smile. "Exactly. I don't need to defend my resume. That's already written. What I do need to do is remind people that dismissing institutions, whether it's law schools, science, journalism, or the courts, is dangerous. Once you make truth optional, it's a short walk to chaos." His words landed heavy. Across the country, people exchanged glances in living rooms and text messages flew. "Did you hear that? He's not even angry. He's teaching." The anchor pressed once more. President Trump said, quote, "Titles don't make you a leader. Results do. How do you respond to that?" Obama tilted his head, calm as ever. "Well, he's right about one thing. Titles don't make you a leader. But results? Let's look at results. I left the country with a growing economy, affordable health care for millions more Americans, and a world that still trusted us. Leadership is about building, not tearing down, about lifting others, not mocking them." The camera zoomed in as his expression sharpened just slightly. "And as for titles, law degrees don't make you a good person, but the work behind that degree, the persistence, the determination, the belief that knowledge matters, that can shape a leader." In the control room, one producer muttered under her breath, "This is a masterclass." Back in living rooms, reactions came fast. A group of teachers in Phoenix sat forward in their seats, one whispering, "That's exactly what I tell my students." In Seattle, a father pointed at the TV for his teenage daughter. This is why you keep studying." Even some conservative pundits watching admitted, privately, if not publicly, that Obama had struck a chord. It wasn't bombast. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. And clarity has a way of cutting through noise. The anchor let the moment sit, then said, "We'll continue with more questions in a moment. But first, we need to take a quick break." Obama leaned back, clasping his hands loosely, and gave a small nod. The cameras cut to commercial, but the feeling in the room was unmistakable. The stage was no longer about defending a degree. It was about reminding a country of its values. But the break was only the calm before the storm, because when they returned, Obama would shift from defending education to directly addressing Trump's pattern of tearing down institutions. When the cameras flicked back on after the commercial break, the energy in the studio had shifted. The anchor's expression was measured, but she couldn't mask the anticipation. Across America, televisions flickered back to life, bars quieted, phones were set down, and millions leaned forward. This wasn't about catching a soundbite anymore. It was about watching how a former president would answer a sitting president's insult without breaking stride. The anchor wasted no time. Mr. Obama, before the break, you spoke about institutions and education, but President Trump didn't just question Harvard, he questioned you. He said your law degree was overrated. What do you say to that directly? Obama exhaled slowly, almost like he had been waiting for the direct challenge. You know, when I first heard what was said, my first instinct was to laugh, because, let's be honest, my life doesn't hinge on whether someone else approves of my degree. But here's the thing, it's not about me. When a sitting president tells the country that education, that hard work, is meaningless, that's not just a jab at Barack Obama. That's a jab at every kid in Detroit pulling an all-nighter to pass the bar. That's a jab at the single mom in Phoenix finishing community college while raising 2 kids. That's a jab at every immigrant family that saves every dime so their child can walk across a graduation stage. The anchor didn't move. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy. Obama leaned forward, his voice gaining quiet strength. I came from modest beginnings. My mother raised me, often struggling to make ends meet. Scholarships, loans, late nights. That's how I made it through Harvard Law. And let me tell you, there's nothing overrated about that. There's nothing overrated about the professors who demanded more of me or the classmates who pushed me harder than I thought I could go. That degree isn't a title. It's a record of perseverance. The anchor jumped in. But President Trump argues that results matter more than credentials. Obama gave a faint smile. And I agree with that. Results matter. So let's talk about results. Millions of families gained health care under my administration. The auto industry recovered. Bin Laden was brought to justice. Those are results. And you don't get there by dismissing knowledge. You get there by valuing it. His tone sharpened slightly, though never raised. Leadership isn't about tearing others down to feel taller. Leadership is about lifting people up. It's about setting an example so that when kids see the highest office in the land, they see dignity. If you tell them education means nothing, what do you think happens to their ambition? If you tell them perseverance is overrated, what message does that send to a 12-year-old kid working through algebra homework tonight? For a moment, the studio was so quiet you could almost hear the hum of the lights above. The anchor let the pause linger before asking, "Do you think President Trump's remarks are dangerous?" Obama didn't hesitate. I think when you dismiss institutions, whether it's higher education, science, journalism, or the judiciary, you're telling Americans that nothing is reliable except one person's opinion. And when that person sits in the Oval Office, that's not just reckless, it's dangerous. The camera cut tighter on his face as he continued. Democracy isn't built on one man's hunch. It's built on laws, on facts, on shared truths. When we start dismantling that, we lose the glue that holds us together. His words seemed to stretch beyond the studio, into classrooms, courtrooms, and kitchen tables across the country. Viewers weren't just hearing a defense of one man's degree, they were hearing a defense of the country's foundation. The anchor finally broke the silence. Mr. President, some might say you're using this moment to lecture rather than defend yourself. Is that intentional? Obama chuckled softly. Look, I don't think Americans need me to defend myself. They can look at my record, they can look at my work. What I think they need right now is perspective. They need to hear that the values we teach our kids, study hard, work hard, play by the rules, still matter. Because if the message from the top is that none of that counts, then what do we have left? His words hung in the air, simple yet devastatingly clear. Across the country, tweets poured out in real time. Obama is schooling him without even raising his voice. This is how you respond, with facts, not fire. Every kid watching this just got a civics lesson for free. In the studio, the anchor shuffled her papers, trying to regain footing. We'll continue our conversation in just a moment, she said, her voice steady but clearly aware of the weight of what had just been said. The red light faded as cameras cut to another break, but everyone watching knew this wasn't over. Obama had spoken, and he had done so with precision. But the real shock came not from Obama's words themselves, but from how the nation's legal minds reacted within minutes, stunned at the depth and clarity of his response. The interview had barely gone to its second commercial break when the legal community erupted. Across the country, professors, practicing attorneys, and constitutional scholars were already phoning into networks, scrambling to put words around what they'd just heard. For many, it wasn't the content alone, it was the delivery. Barack Obama had dismantled an insult without once raising his voice, and that restraint carried more power than any angry rebuttal ever could. On CNN, the network quickly assembled a panel of experts. At the center sat Professor Linda Hawthorne, a constitutional scholar from Georgetown. Her glasses perched low, she shook her head as she replayed the clip in real time. "That wasn't a response," she said firmly. "That was a clinic. He took what could have been a personal attack and turned it into a broader message about institutions and democracy. That's how you elevate the conversation." Beside her, attorney Michael Reyes, who had clerked for the Supreme Court in the 1990s, nodded. What struck me was his framing. He didn't defend Harvard as an elite institution. He defended the struggle, the hours, the debt, the late nights. That resonates not just with lawyers, but with anyone who's ever worked their way towards something hard. He just connected a law degree to the American dream. Meanwhile, on MSNBC, a different panel was buzzing with disbelief. "I've taught constitutional law for 3 decades, said Professor Joanne Patel of the University of Michigan. But in 5 minutes, Obama just gave one of the clearest explanations of why institutions matter that I've ever heard on television. He reminded us that democracy runs on shared truth, not on one man's whims. That's the part legal minds can't stop replaying. Even over on Fox News, where criticism of Obama was the default, there was hesitation. Conservative commentator Greg Norland looked down at his notes, then admitted, "Look, I'm no fan of Barack Obama, but I have to say, this was measured. He didn't lash out. He didn't insult back. He made his point calmly, and that's hard to spin. Viewers at home are going to see someone who looks presidential, even now." The shockwave wasn't confined to television studios. In law schools across the country, professors halted evening lectures and pulled up the live interview on projectors. At Yale, students sat in stunned silence as Obama's words poured from the screen. One second-year law student whispered to his friend, "That's the kind of clarity we dream of giving in moot court. He's just surgical." At a bar in downtown St. Louis, a group of lawyers finishing happy hour argued over every line. "He didn't defend himself," one attorney marveled. "He defended the idea of hard work itself. That's genius." Another lawyer chimed in. "Trump wanted a fight in the mud. Obama pulled the conversation onto higher ground." Legal blogs lit up instantly. Articles titled "Obama's Harvard Defense, a Civics Lesson" on live TV and When Law Meets Leadership popped up within an hour. One piece from Above the Law read, "Barack Obama didn't just win the argument, he reframed it." In one segment, he reminded America why institutions matter, why truth matters, and why leadership is more than one man's bravado. It was less of a rebuttal and more of a masterclass. Back in the NBC studio, as the interview resumed, the anchor was almost playing catch-up to the tidal wave of reaction outside the building. Her producers were in her ear, telling her, "Twitter's blowing up. Legal experts are calling this historic." She adjusted her notes nervously and leaned forward. "Mr. Obama," she said, "I want to tell you something. While we've been talking, I've been receiving live updates from our producers. Legal experts across the country are already weighing in. Many are calling your comments a civics lesson, and some are saying this will be remembered as one of your most important public responses since leaving office. How does that make you feel?" Obama smiled politely, his hands folded on the desk. "Well, I'll leave the headlines to the press. I'm just trying to speak plainly about what matters. And if people find value in that, then I suppose it tells us something. Americans are hungry for clarity, hungry for truth." In homes across America, viewers felt that statement like a jolt. This wasn't spin. This wasn't soundbite politics. It was the simple, steady voice of someone who seemed more interested in teaching than in trading blows. Meanwhile, back at Harvard, the dean of the law school gave a brief press statement to a crowd of reporters who had gathered outside the gates. "Barack Obama earned his degree here through merit, hard work, and excellence," the dean said firmly. To hear him defend not just himself, but every student striving for better, well, I think tonight speaks for itself. The reaction spread from scholars and professors to ordinary Americans. Tweets, Facebook posts, and even Instagram reels began circulating. One particularly viral clip came from a teacher in Oklahoma who filmed her classroom full of high school juniors watching Obama speak. She captioned it, "They just watched a president explain why their homework matters. That's the lesson for tonight." But the real test of the night wasn't in classrooms or studios. It was in the living rooms of everyday Americans. where ordinary people weighed his words against Trump's insult and decided whose vision of leadership they believed. As the interview carried on, living rooms across America became their own mini debate halls. Families, roommates, and neighbors gathered around televisions, not just watching, but reacting in real time. In Sacramento, a retired nurse named Gloria Henderson sat with her daughter and teenage grandson. The boy, still in his high school hoodie, asked, "Grandma, why is he talking about kids like me?" Gloria smiled and pointed at the screen. "Because he wants you to know it matters. Those long nights studying, those tests you hate. He's telling you that's the road to something bigger. Don't let anyone cheapen that." The boy leaned back, quiet now, but his eyes stayed fixed on the television. In Austin, a small group of Uber drivers parked their cars in the lot of a taco joint, watching the interview on someone's tablet propped up against a soda cup. One of them, Sergio, shook his head. "Man, he didn't even get mad. He just flipped it. Like he took the insult and made it into fuel. That's what you call control." Another driver added, "And he talked about moms working 2 jobs to get kids through school. That hit me right here." He pressed his fist to his chest. Meanwhile, in Boston, a group of Harvard law students crammed into a dorm lounge, the same institution at the heart of the insult. A young woman, Maria Alvarez, stood up after Obama's line about kids grinding late into the night. She said firmly, "That's us. That's every one of us in this room. If he can sit there and carry that insult with calm, then we have no excuse to give up on our own fight." The students clapped, not out of politeness, but because they felt like someone had just defended their daily struggle on national television. On Twitter, reactions came like a flood. A clip of Obama saying, "Leadership isn't about tearing others down to feel taller," crossed 2 million views in under an hour. A high school teacher in Kansas reposted it with the caption, "Play this in every classroom tomorrow." A lawyer in Miami tweeted, "I spent years in debt for my degree. Tonight, Obama reminded me why it mattered, and why it still matters." In Cleveland, a group of factory workers watched from the corner TV at a union hall. One of them, a man in his 50s with grease on his hands, muttered, "I didn't vote for Obama, but damn, that sounded right. Guy talks like he actually knows what it means to work." His co-worker nodded slowly. "Trump talks loud, Obama talks steady. Sometimes steady wins." But not all reactions were supportive. In rural Missouri, a family sat at their kitchen table, Fox News streaming on the laptop. The father scoffed, "Harvard this, Harvard that, elitist garbage. Trump's right. Real smarts don't come from a degree." His teenage daughter hesitated before replying, "Yeah, but he didn't sound elitist. He talked about regular people working hard. Didn't you hear that part?" The father went quiet, staring at the screen as if unwilling to admit she might have a point. Instagram filled with short reels, especially among college students. One video showed a young woman studying in her dorm, pausing her flashcards to hold her phone up to the screen where Obama was speaking. The text over the video read, "This is why I don't give up at 2 a.m. It was shared more than 100,000 times. Even celebrities chimed in. A well-known actor from Los Angeles posted, "Obama just taught the best class I've seen on live TV. Calm, facts, respect. That's leadership." A country singer from Tennessee tweeted, "You don't have to like his politics, but respect how the man carried himself tonight. That's how adults handle nonsense." Back at NBC headquarters, producers were overwhelmed by the flood of viewer emails. One caught their attention immediately. It was from a middle school principal in Des Moines, Iowa. "I had 200 kids in the auditorium tonight watching this interview," she wrote. "For once, they weren't fidgeting. They weren't on their phones. They listened. And afterward, they asked questions about law, about democracy, about working hard. You don't see that every day." As the program drew closer to its end, the anchor leaned in with one more question. "Mr. Obama, tonight you've spoken about education, democracy, and leadership. But the truth is, your remarks have already sparked debate across the country. Social media is exploding. Law schools are pausing classes. Families are having conversations in their living rooms. Did you expect your response to resonate this strongly?" Obama clasped his hands, his tone measured. "Honestly, I didn't think about resonance. I thought about responsibility. When you're given a platform, whether it's the presidency or a classroom, you owe people clarity. And if tonight helped one student believe that their work is worth it, then it was worth my time." But as the interview wrapped, the question became, what would the fallout look like in the days to come, especially inside the White House, where aides scrambled to manage the damage from a moment that wasn't supposed to be this powerful? By the time the credits rolled on the NBC interview, the air in Washington felt charged. Obama had spoken for less than an hour, but the aftershocks were immediate and unmistakable. Cable networks replayed his quotes on loop. Headlines screamed across digital front pages. Obama responds with calm precision. Former president turns insult into civics lesson. Obama's words reverberate nationwide. At the White House, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. Trump's senior aides were huddled in the Roosevelt room, the mood tense. Phones buzzed with incoming texts, email alerts, and push notifications from news outlets. Every staffer in the room knew the same thing. What had been intended as a throwaway jab at Obama had become the story of the week. One advisor tossed his phone on the table in frustration. It's everywhere. Every network, every outlet. They're not even calling it a response. They're calling it a lesson. Another aide flipped open a laptop, projecting trending hashtags onto the wall. #civics lesson, how Obama speaks, truth matters. He's hijacked the narrative. People aren't mocking him. They're applauding him. Even independents, even some of our voters. Trump himself paced the room, visibly irritated. Fake news, he snapped, waving a hand dismissively. Nobody cares about what Obama says. Nobody's watching. But one of his pollsters spoke up carefully. Mr. President, with respect, people are watching. We're seeing a spike in approval for Obama just in the last hour. His words about education and leadership, they're cutting across party lines. We can spin, but the footage is everywhere. Trump shot him a glare, then dropped into a chair, arms crossed. Fine, we'll hit back tomorrow. Tweet something stronger. Remind people Obama's record wasn't perfect. Bring up the economy. Bring up jobs. We'll drown it out. Across town, the late-night shows wasted no time turning the moment into their opening monologues. Jimmy Kimmel told his audience, Trump said Obama's law degree was overrated. Obama responded by giving us all a free lecture on democracy. That's like insulting a doctor and then getting a full checkup for free. The crowd roared with laughter, but even the comedians knew there was more weight here than usual. Newspapers across the country ran editorials by dawn. The Boston Globe wrote, what America witnessed last night was a reminder of how far dignity and reason can carry an argument, even in the face of mockery. The Chicago Tribune added, Obama's calm response stood in stark contrast to Trump's bluster. In that contrast lies the future of political discourse. In Houston, a local morning radio host fielded calls from listeners on both sides. One man said, I don't like Obama's politics, but he carried himself with class. That's what I want my kids to see. Another caller pushed back, Trump's right. Degrees don't mean much in the real world. Yet the host noticed something unusual. More callers than not leaned toward Obama's side, praising his restraint. By mid-morning, the story was dominating international headlines as well. The BBC called it a defining moment in the Obama-Trump rivalry. Le Monde in France described it as Obama giving a calm rebuttal that transcended politics. Even in conservative outlets abroad, commentators noted how unusual it was for a former leader to so effectively shift the narrative away from a sitting president. Back at Harvard, students organized an impromptu gathering on the steps of Langdell Hall. They held signs that read, hard work is never overrated and truth still matters. A professor addressed the crowd with a microphone. Last night, Barack Obama defended more than a degree. He defended the principle that effort counts, that knowledge matters, and that no one, no matter how powerful, should strip that away. The momentum spilled over into classrooms. Teachers from California to Ohio reported that their students wanted to talk about the interview, not as gossip, but as substance. One middle school teacher in Arizona said, for once my kids wanted to debate something real. They weren't asking about TikTok. They were asking why truth matters in democracy. Meanwhile, editorial boards weren't the only ones weighing in. A group of prominent judges, speaking anonymously to reporters, admitted that Obama's remarks hit them hard. We've been worried about public trust in the judiciary, one judge said. When a leader dismisses institutions so casually, it erodes confidence. Obama reminded us why protecting that trust matters. As the day went on, Trump stuck to his word. His Twitter feed lit up with counterattacks. Obama was a failure. Harvard isn't what it used to be. Results are what count, not paper degrees. But each post was met with a tidal wave of responses, many quoting Obama's calm words back at him. Leadership isn't about tearing others down to feel taller, one reply read. Maybe you should take notes. The White House press secretary tried to downplay the firestorm during the daily briefing, insisting the president was simply making a broader point about elitism. But the room full of reporters pressed harder, repeating Obama's comments back to her. Cameras caught her shifting in her seat, visibly uncomfortable, and through it all, Obama remained silent. After the interview, he returned home, had dinner with Michelle, and declined further media requests. His team knew better than to oversaturate the moment. The power was in the restraint. He had said enough, and the country was still processing it. But as the dust began to settle, the bigger question lingered. What lesson would Americans carry forward? Trump's dismissal of education, or Obama's reminder that truth, hard work, and dignity still hold weight? The morning after Obama's live interview, the nation felt like it was running on a different rhythm. Talk radio shows were filled with callers debating what they had seen. Cafeteria tables at schools buzzed with students repeating lines they'd heard. In offices, coworkers gathered by coffee machines, not just gossiping, but reflecting. The insult had faded into the background. What remained was the response. In a suburban high school in Arizona, an English teacher replayed a clip of Obama's words for her first period class. Leadership isn't about tearing others down to feel taller. The room fell quiet. A boy in the back, usually disengaged, raised his hand. He's saying leaders should build people up instead of just bragging? The teacher smiled. Exactly. And that's a lesson for all of us, not just politicians. The boy nodded slowly, scribbling the line into his notebook. In Detroit, a mother named Denise sat at her kitchen table with her teenage daughter, who had just come home from an early basketball practice. Over cereal bowls, the daughter said, "Mom, I saw Obama on TikTok last night. He said education matters, even if people don't respect it. That made me think, maybe staying up late studying isn't pointless." Denise reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. "That's the whole point, baby. Your effort is never wasted." In rural Ohio, a mechanic named Carl replayed the interview on his phone during a lunch break at the garage. Grease on his hands, sandwich in the other, he muttered to himself. Man didn't shout, didn't get petty. He just explained it. That's how grown folks handle disrespect. His coworker shrugged. "Yeah, but Trump's right about results." Carl looked at him squarely. "Sure, but you don't get results by saying hard work don't matter. That's where he messed up." Editorial pages across the country echoed the same theme. The Los Angeles Times wrote, "Barack Obama reminded America last night that strength doesn't require volume, that dignity, truth, and perseverance will always outlast bluster." The Washington Post headline read, "The degree wasn't the point, the lesson was." Even internationally, the moral thread was picked up. The Guardian noted, Obama transformed a petty insult into a moment of national reflection on the value of education. In Canada, the Globe and Mail said, it was less a defense of one man and more a defense of shared ideals. But the moral impact wasn't confined to columns. It played out in quieter, personal moments. In Dallas, a single father wrote on Facebook, "I've been working 2 jobs to put my daughter through college. When Obama said insults against education hurt families like mine, I felt seen. For the first time in a while, I felt proud instead of tired." In a courthouse in Portland, a young public defender mentioned the interview to a client waiting for a hearing. "See? Even presidents get told their work doesn't count, but it does. Yours does too." The client, a young man trying to turn his life around, nodded slowly, almost surprised that a political moment could reach into his own struggle. The deeper truth resonated. Leadership wasn't about titles, nor was it about loudness. It was about respect for institutions, for truth, for the hard work ordinary people put in every day. Obama had modeled a way to respond to provocation without sinking into pettiness. Trump's insult had been sharp, designed to wound. But Obama's answer had been sharper in a different way. It cut through cynicism and reminded people that ideals are only as strong as the voices willing to defend them. As late-night hosts replayed clips and memes flew around social media, one constant remained. People weren't quoting Trump. They were quoting Obama. The insult had evaporated, leaving behind only the lesson. And maybe that was the real win. Not for Obama, not for Trump, but for every viewer who walked away believing a little more in the value of their own effort. For every student who stayed up another hour studying, for every parent who believed the sacrifice mattered, for every worker who held their head higher, knowing perseverance is never overrated. Because in the end, what lasts isn't the noise, it's the clarity. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this. Dignity is louder than insults, truth is stronger than noise, and your hard work, no matter who questions it, will always matter. If you want to hear more stories that remind us why respect and perseverance count, don't forget to subscribe.